this kind of taken us up through where we wanted to go. We are going to take a look at some of the questions that have come in through chat, and we'll probably provide some additional information that we think we may have glossed over initially. But one of the questions that did come in, or there was a detailed question, is when will the funds be dispersed and when can they be spent? A follow-up to that is, how is the amount per eligible site determined, and is there an eligible equipment list? So when the funds will be dispersed, essentially based on some of the information we provided a little bit earlier. Again, we're going to have to get through this ranking process, so this isn't going to be something that's going to be announced or determined right away. In addition to requiring the validation information, we still have to look at engineering and implementation cost. And so we're going to be working very closely with CNIC to be able to determine what some of those costs are going to be. And obviously, like we mentioned, there is a potential that there is not enough funding out of the $26.7 million to go to all eligible sites. And so we have to find ways to potentially either stretch dollars. We're going to have to look at which solutions may potentially be implemented early on in the cycle, versus maybe, moving off to a later date. So there's a range of factors that may go into effect.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things that as we're moving through this process is that we're fine-tuning that procurement process. In some cases, it may be that the solution is procured on behalf of the district, as we've explained earlier today through the E-rate process. So it doesn't mean that the LEA would actually receive the funds to implement, but it would be implemented for them through the funds, and then it would be, to a certain degree, that responsibility transfer. So we're looking at all those pieces. They haven't been finalized. As a program, we're trying to look at all the current approaches for procurement, trying to make sure that we navigate through the constraints that obviously come with some of these subsidy programs, and align the timelines, which is going to be a challenge. So as far as the other questions, the amount eligible per site determined, that's to be seen. We do envision that this program mimics more the E-rate program based on need, but we're certainly, as part of the budget language, there is certainly a component that we need to look at as cost benefit or cost value, so that needs to be taken into consideration. And then the third piece of what eligible equipment is eligible on the list is we think that those are all the pieces of equipment that are needing to be put in place to put that last mile connection. So we are thinking that could be a router, a switch, some electronics like fiber optic modules or things that can help light a connection. So those are the typical things that you would have at a site and be able to connect. It would also cover the electronics on both sides. So if there's enhancements that are required at the district office, for example, to set the connection, then those would also be included.
One additional question that was asked is, for example, why would we be on the school site eligibility list if we already have fiber to all sites? Part of that may have been, based on the responses that we received on your testing experience. And so some folks were saying they struggle with the testing experience, but they may have a very, very significant or substantial external connection and potential to scale up over time. Again, so for those sites, essentially, we're really, this funding wasn't really, earmarked or designed for them. So again, we're looking at those sites that are really, really either underconnected or face significant hardship in actually implementing the CASP. Again, as far as why they're on the SSEL, they were probably identified based on what their field test experience was. But in terms of looking at some of this information that's coming in, some of this validation information, both in the pre and full that we're going to get, we'll be able to identify whether or not sites really do qualify for this particular funding. One additional question is, when will the SSEL be updated? One of the things that we're trying to do is essentially, as sites are coming in, We're trying to determine where they're going to fall or be placed in terms of, are they going to make it through into the next validation round? Are they going to kind of just sit until all information comes in? We do expect to update that SSEL and place it on the KHOHSN website. We're probably about a few days away from potentially doing that, and we may actually just wait until the actual close of the September 30th deadline before we actually do that, so we give every site a chance to come in and submit information. How will a site need to show that they have an insufficient connection? That's kind of a catchy question. You know, it's based on the information that you're providing. So there are a couple things that you know, without leading this question and telling everybody, you know, what we're looking for, I think, you know, it's based on your connection, your scale, eventually what your scalability for the connection is. We will be looking at things along the lines of what you endured during the field test, what hardship you faced, as well as, you know, some of those engineering questions that are going to come in the subsequent validation round. You know, we'll look at other things, including enrollment and you know, testing devices and things of that nature. But there are several factors that are going to be looked at here. And again, we're trying to avoid the idea of this is intended for internal connections, or this is related to only the number of devices. You know, so you have a solid connection and little contention, or, you know, not in very low peak capacity, but you only have 20 devices. That's not, again, what this funding was intended for. So we're going to be looking at a variety of things to be able to determine what is an insufficient connection.
Yeah, and as part of the validation, and this is why our county offices are helping us with this process, is that we are exploring some tools to help us with that. There are monitoring tools out there, so looking at utilization and then potentially, if need to, put some additional tools that can help us determine other parameters such as latency that can help with this process.
Any additional questions that have come in?
I see, actually, Joe Darren from Department of Ed is asking, did you say when the eligibility list will be updated? Yeah,
so I mentioned it's going to be updated either soon or at the end of the September 30th window, based on, you know, how we still have to determine some of the issues with the validation variables.
We are hearing from people that were on the list, and they were placed on the list because their COE knew they had some problem. We are getting some of those people now telling us with these narrowed parameters they're not eligible. So those changes we can make. We'll probably be taking input from Department of Education about how often they would like to see us post the list. It's conceivably a way that we prompt someone placed on the list who's not moving forward with providing us information. It's conceivable we would take those off the list if they haven't moved forward, and then the understanding that, oh, if I want to be there and I do actually have these issues, I'm going to start my process then.
Terry mentioned something really important that we've been talking about internally, is that, you know, folks that are on that SSEL, we're going to be notifying, you know, we want them to go through submitting that site information to us, and so we'll be kind of pinging them to do that, or reminding them, or we're going to be placing it somewhere where they can do that. There are also folks who have started submitting information into Fluid Review but have not finalized or actually not clicked on the submit button. And so they're also going to be getting notifications from us saying, you know, hey, you've made it through a certain phase of this, but you need to go back and submit. So we're trying to watch all those things and make sure we're communicating that effectively. One other thing I want to mention, I think, because it is important, if you haven't looked at all of, you know, SB 852 or you know, some of what was essentially assigned in that section regarding this, is there also is another component that we're not going to talk about today, which is a statewide needs assessment to determine connectivity infrastructure across the state of California for schools. You know, we want you to all be aware that any information that we're getting on this is also going to help potentially make a case for where we are across the state of California in terms of connectivity and infrastructure and some of the challenges that we face. So I don't want anybody to feel like the information that they provided or some of this information is all for naught. I think at the end of this is all going to be very, very relevant for the state, for the California Department of Ed, for K-12HSN, for everybody, so that we can kind of figure out moving forward where we may need to go or what options we may have. We do have some questions that have now been coming in. Is student enrollment or free and reduced counts taken into consideration for implementation? Student enrollment is a difficult consideration. You have to remember, for example, we have elementary schools and middle schools as well as high schools applying. High schools are only testing at the 11th grade level, so you may have a site enrollment of 4,000, but only 1,000 are going to test, and that's a very large site, but you may have 1,200 and only 300 kids are going to test, and more than likely, the likelihood is that not everybody is going to test at one time. And so when we're talking about external connections, we're looking at, what are you maxing your connection at if you're testing? What is the highest maximum number of simultaneous test takers that will be on at one particular point, so that we can determine what the threshold is for the kilobit per second per student ratio. So enrollment is going to be one factor, but not just general enrollment of the site. And obviously, again, we're going to have to look at, what grade levels we'll be testing and things of that nature. Free and reduced counts, we are looking at, and that is a separate variable, but essentially that is kind of not included in the information regarding connectivity. That is kind of a...
As in, it matters, but it's unlikely to be a scored topic in the site validation step.
Another question that came in was, what is the most funding that will be granted to a level 1 school? And the concern is for everybody is that if a level 1 will absorb most or all of the funding. That's a great question. I don't know that we have fully determined that because we're still waiting for feedback and kind of some collaborative conversations with the Department of Ed, State Board of Education.
And there is no cap. If a site requires $800,000 to resolve their problem, then and they're ranking as one of the neediest schools, that project may well be funded.
Another question that's come in is, have we, K-12HSN, considered partnering with ISP providers to also provide service for the surrounding communities to mitigate costs?
Well, that's a great question. I think that as we're looking at the procurement process, we are certainly envision engaging with the service providers in the areas and trying to look at some of the strategic investments and how they can be leveraged. In some cases, we all have the possibility of looking at schools that may benefit from a specific build and try to leverage those investments. Keep in mind, too, that there's a high indication or preference, actually, for this process to connect schools to the K-12HSN and the CalRIN network. And that goes to demonstrate that the state is very interested in us leveraging the existing infrastructure that's in place. We might find that a site may have to connect directly to a service provider, but that we envision that would be an exception and certainly an option that will be explored. So until we go through the engineering and procurement process, we won't have a lot of the details of how this is going to unfold. But certainly within the process, we have the flexibility to look at solutions that will benefit the most schools that we can, and then kill several birds with one stone.
Great question. Another question that's come in that may be beneficial is, this particular leadership is asking if there'd be any benefit for sites to self-nominate to represent to the state KHOH additional needs. In this case, would you encourage sites to self-nominate? We're encouraging sites to self-nominate only if they feel they're going to qualify or be eligible for funding, or they have a significant need or hardship with regard to their external connection. You know, I mentioned this additional report that we're going to be on the hook for and working with the Department of Ed to get that completed. We're going to actually be working with county offices of education to address and identify sites within their region to provide some of this report information for. So the report is actually going to be a much more detailed kind of deep dive into connectivity and site information. You know, so we're going to ask then about wireless and access points. We're going to ask about things like devices and potential staffing. So we're going to look at a range of things in there. And so for this particular process, we really just want sites to self-nominate if they believe they're going to qualify or they have a significant need they want to identify to us that they feel they should be on this list for some of this funding.
And part of that has to do with we have such an aggressive timeline that trying to process, we're trying to minimize the processing and focus our efforts where they're highly needed. And there's already a lot of sites on the list that we have to go through, and part of the, I think the biggest challenge with this project is and still is the timeline to be able to get this off the ground. So.
Another question: what if there's funding left over? Would these applicants be reviewed for funding afterwards? So I'm essentially assuming what you're referring to here. The question is that if there's funding, are we going to go to whoever didn't, for example, qualify in Priority 1 or Priority 2? I think the hope is that all funding would be expended for those hardship sites across the state of California. At least, ideally, that would be the case.
And the budget bill language, where it calls for the report, and gives authority. It gives authority to spend for these dire hardships. If we got through solving those and there was money left, I think the next step would be those stakeholders at the state level, Department of Finance and Department of Education and the Governor's Office and State Board of Education, they would provide some direction to us about what to do next if there were funds remaining.
Well, and given the list of sites that we have, and just having some preliminary conversations with some of these schools and the cost of the builds, these are very expensive builds, and we are doing this outside the E-rate process. So we are in most cases looking at paying full cost for these installations. So our hunch right now is that we're going to far exceed the $26 million after going through this process.
Yes, the initial requester and the technical point of contact will receive notification when it's time for them to fill out the full validation form. There will be email messages that come from Fluid Review System. We do have a concern that in some cases those messages might get caught in spam filters. So we will be monitoring. If we see someone that message went to and they're not responding, we probably will be following up with a direct email from staff here at K-12 High Speed Network.
There are several questions related to that full validation form. So, you know, Terry's alluding to one. What information is going to be needed was another question. When will it be available? It'll be available in the very near term. So essentially everybody who's self-nominated or provided site information, we're going to take a look at and essentially see what that pre-validation information provides us. And then we're going to begin moving sites into the full validation round for those that are eligible. And so again, if there's a site who submits information telling us they have fiber, they have a 1 gig connection, you know, and you know, very little contention and that type of stuff, essentially they're going to be kind of dropped down on the list, and they will probably more than likely will not make it in through to the full validation. But that should be coming up shortly. We're just determining a couple additional points with regards to things like the engineering process and service information and things of that nature. And again, as Terry mentioned, we're going to be contacting folks, and they're going to get notification as they begin moving from one round or one stage to the next in this fluid review system.
I saw a question asking about whether fiber is the only solution that we're looking at. The answer is no. There'll be some places that, although that is you know, our first priority to try and install that because of the benefits and of scalability and several other things. There will be cases, we think, in the really most critical need places that fiber is not going to turn out to be their solution.
Yeah, we have to do a cost analysis and look at some options. In some cases, just trying to lay the fiber can be very challenging. We've learned from several federal projects that, you know, especially when you're going through very difficult terrain, such as mountainous terrain and very hard soil or rock, you know, the cost of boring fiber in can be astronomically expensive. So in some cases, solutions like fixed wireless could be an alternative solution. So that those are the kinds of things we need to look at as we go through the engineering process.
More than likely, one of the questions in that full validation is going to ask about previous attempts at solving the situation, and we'll include some narrative so that you can explain what things you may have explored. And then so as the engineering process is underway and some of these things begin to map out, we'll be able to potentially identify alternatives or potentially leverage some of the things that you may have attempted in the past. Hopefully, or obviously, hopefully with more success. We did get one additional question. You know, it says our school has already applied, our district has already applied for E-rate for 14-15, and we're looking into high-speed providers. We've already started the process with one provider, but it has not been completed. Can we still take advantage of this grant to help fund the initial setup cost of the service when it does get implemented?
That's a great question. So we certainly, if a site falls within the priorities, priority 1 or priority 2, we don't want to exclude anybody from the process. Now, if you have already a procurement in place and you have a solution, you have a contract, and you've paid for services, then we're not looking at those types of scenarios. But if it's the solution is still hasn't been developed, or you're in the process, then and you qualify, you know, your priority 1, priority 2, then certainly we can fold that site into the process, and perhaps through this grant, a solution can be alternate solution can be found, or could get expedited and could support. So. I would encourage that if those conditions apply, that you give us a call and go through the process, so that at least it could go through the full validation process, and we can further determine if this grant would be able to support that situation.
So we did have one additional question also. It says, what if E-rate funding was applied, was recently approved, but has not been installed, with the possibility that the telecom provider may not be able to provide the service?
Yeah, so I think that kind of speaks to the same scenario that I just spoke about. And quite frankly, you know, a reality is, and we hope we don't get this, but a reality is that we might not get options for all these sites. We are working with service providers to help them understand the critical nature of this issue. But in some cases, and you know, it's been really a big hurdle over the years, not only from experience by LEAs, but by our program and a lot of sites out there in California where there are just no service providers. We have other sites that are very challenging that might be located in very difficult areas such as a national park, in the middle of a national park. And so that has tremendous implications for permits and right-of-ways and those kinds of things. Those are usually protected lands, and we'll take other types of solutions to consider.
We are very near the end of our 1 hour. Looks like we haven't received any additional questions. I'd like to extend the opportunity to, for those of you, if you haven't submitted a question and that you have pressing, that you please do so at this point.
I think, have we said when the site validation steps will open and close? Have we said that?
We mentioned it a little bit. The full validation will open hopefully by very soon, essentially. Once we start moving folks into that round, and we're going to close that off on October 10th.
And I plan to open it by September 15th.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
We are scrambling here, so to speak, to do some final revisions and fine-tuning to the documents. We are kind of taking the approach of measuring twice and cutting once, so it's taking a little longer than we expected, but rest assured that as soon as we get that out, we'll make it available for county offices and the applicants as well.
And one thing I'll add, Luis mentioned this yesterday, in many ways this has kind of been experimental to a certain degree in terms of the way that this has been done and hopefully accomplished in the next couple months. And so again, we appreciate all the questions, we appreciate all the feedback we've gotten, and your flexibility in this process. I think that it's been key and pivotal. And again, we really, the hope is that we're servicing these sites so that the kids, which is essentially what it comes down to at the very end of the day, have what they need to successfully carry out the test, but more importantly, have options to real-world connectivity that's going to bring in a variety of other teaching and learning variables that may not have been there otherwise. And so I think it's important to consider that at all points in this process for all of us.
Yeah, that's a great comment, Eddie. And I think that to a certain degree, this hasn't been done anywhere, and we are really kind of paving the way here. So please bear with us. We are tweaking the process as we move along and take each step, and we're looking at our approaches. We want to be as thoughtful as possible through every single step, because it's not easy. It's a very complicated process with a very aggressive timeline. So please do talk to your county office. We've been communicating them we're very close communication with their county offices and making sure that they're there to support you. We're here to support you, and we certainly want to thank you for taking the time this morning to learn more about this great opportunity.
Okay, and we appreciate that comment from Vern that we might have questions in another location. We'll make sure we cover those this afternoon. And we have room this afternoon, and if any of you are interested, of course, there will also be Q&As posted on the website as quickly as we can get those up.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.